All right. Well, this was a really fun presentation to put together. The intention of this is to give you guys an idea about the plants, some of the interesting geology found at Panther Den, and then for you to be able to plan your own trip, just not all at the exact same time. So if you're wondering where Panther Den is, this is over just east of Giant City State Park. So it's really pretty close to Giant City. And I also put all the other wilderness areas in there too, just so you become aware of those as well. But we do have quite a few other wilderness areas in the Shawnee to go visit. So big red square right over Panther Den there, just about 20 minutes east of Giant City State Park off of Panther Den Road. So it's real easy to get to. This is located in the Shawnee Hills Natural Division, and specifically this is in the Greater Shawnee Hills section. So these are all sandstone bluffs, and just below that, those are the lesser Shawnee Hills. And so I dropped this pin on there. That pin there is dropped right on top of Panther Den Road. So that's where the Shawnee Hills, and just like Giant City, we have these really gigantic rock outcroppings all over throughout these geologic features. And so this is what the hike really, this is the main excitement of this hike that I took on my trip out to Panther's Den. And so we have, kind of feels like a cityscape, just like Giant City, like you're walking down the streets. So a little bit of a trail overview. The actual trail itself is a 3-mile loop. And so I ended up hiking, you can see my cursor over top. You can see I hiked this trail here. And so this is hiking trail number 371 and trail number 001. And what I ended up doing was a full loop trail. So this was 3 miles is what it comes out to, but with additional plant identification, wandering, and looking over there and here, it turns into about 3.7 miles. Overall, I would rate the difficulty at moderate, since there are some terrain and some rocks. But there is a map right when you pull up. So here's Panther Den Road right here. You come pulling up, and there's a sign right here with the trail marker and everything. And so that's that sign that puts you a little parking lot right here. This is the route that I took. So I had a phone following me throughout the whole hike. And so doing the whole loop, I went in this direction here. And so that's going to help us for the future of this presentation, because I broke the hike into 3 different sections. And so this would be section 1, 2, and 3. Some plant stats from the entire day out. 162 plants were identified in 69 different families. These were in the Asteraceae and the Rosaceae family. So the Aster and the Rose family were the 2 most represented families. Some sporophytes were identified too, lots of them. 13 sporophytes in 4 different families. So we had the spleenworts, shield ferns, the adder tongues, and the sensitive fern family. Also some notable mentions were the honeysuckles, the carices, beans, beeches, grasses, and roses. So overall, the 3 parts of this hike, the long stretch, getting through the woods at a moderate elevation grade section. Oops. So that's this section here. This is the awesome geology section. And this is where all those really intense rock outcroppings are, all along these bluff lines here. And then you're getting out from the awesome geology section. You have the area back out to the parking lot on an old roadbed section. And so that brings you back. So we have some activities to do along the way of each of these sections. And so 5 activities per section that you can work on as you're making your way from here to the awesome geology section. So we're going to go through these activities. And I also put some information on the signage and some landscape shots too. So first we're going to identify 3 different bean species. Tell the difference between these 3 plants here. These 3 usually throw people for a loop and are difficult to identify. Look for 3 different vining species, find a Botrychium or a Sceptridium, and then find 3 different rose species, since that was a really highly represented family. This is what the signage looked like. This is right at the beginning of the trail, trail number 371 to junction 001. And then along the way, there was this sign that looks like it was maybe made in the 70s or so that's still hanging onto a sycamore tree. Couple more signs just along the way. This is the junction right here as you're making your way all the way to the end of the trail from that first sign you just saw to trail number 001. And this is the section number 2, which is the geology section. Here's some landscape shots. The trail is really well maintained and has a nice wide footpath that you can take the whole way. So it makes for a really enjoyable. All these plants that I had identified were found with very minimal wandering. Although it was at 0.7 miles, that's very minimal wandering throughout the whole course of the trip. And then good carex diversity too. I found, although we're not going to be talking a lot about the carex species, they were represented quite a bit. And so this is Carex rosea. It's identified through the hand lens here. You can see these curling, it's like ram's horns right there. And Circia letitiana, the enchanter's nightshade. Some landscape going down into the canyon there. This would be as you were getting out of the long stretch and heading into the geology section. So we'll start off with the first of the tasks. So find 3 bean species. The 3 bean species I chose were the Desmodium paniculatum, the panicled tick trefoil. So this is a Desmodium. It's got those triangular seeds that get stuck all over you. This one has really long, it's easy to identify, real long leaflets here. So that one's a really easy one. This is a really common vining bean that was found along the whole entire trail, Amphicarpa bracteata. That's the hog peanut. And then Galactea regularis, the milk pea. And so put these 3 on there. None of them have the bean flower, the banner wings or the keel, but they all are noticeably looking like beans. So I was able to identify those along the way without any bean flower. These 3 plants here, just write these down now, and because with these photos alone, you won't really be able to identify them all the way, but these are 3 plants that usually are confused with each other. The geum here, which geum has the same common name, so it's geum is geum. Osmoriza longistilis, sweet Sicily, and the honewort, Cryptotania canadensis. So these 2 are in the Apiaceae. This one's in the Rosaceae family. But right now, Osmoriza has really these noticeable seed pods right here. So that would be a identifying feature. Cryptotania has different looking leaves than the Osmoriza, and also has this little leafy appendage right here at the end of its petiole. And then Geum canadensis, or canadense, is a white flower plant right now that has similar leaves to all 2 of these. So find 3 vining species. So there's there's a lot of different grapes that were there, but the three that were chosen were the moonseed, Menispermum canadense, Passiflora lutea, the passion flower, the yellow passion flower, and the Vitis cinerea, grape. And so you don't necessarily need to identify the same plants when you go out here. Just set different tasks for yourself and think of different ways that you can challenge your botanical knowledge along the way. The other one was find a grape fern or something in the Ophioglossacea family. So Kurt's going to be talking later about this family and some changes that were made. And so I found Botrypis virginianus, which has a synonym, Botrychium virginianum. And so hopefully I'll be understanding a little bit more, because I had learned some of these in a different way before, and then the name had changed. And so very interesting talk coming up I'm pretty excited about. 3 different roses. I put Agremonia parviflora and Agremonia rostulata because these are 2 agrimonies that you could tell apart pretty easily, especially parviflora. It's got many leaflets, 11 to 17, and so that really sets it aside from the other agrimonies. And then Porteranthus stipulatus. This is on the way out. It's in bloom right now too. And as Mullenbrock says, this is occasional in the south half of the state. Okay, so we've made it through the woods, and now we're heading into the awesome geology section. So some activities to do along the way here. The fern diversity was awesome over here. So we're going to ID 5 ferns, find Aruncus dioicus, ID 3 species in the Urticaceae, the nettle family, give Joe Pye a high five, and admire some Heuchera parviflora. This is the landscape on the way in. The signage coming in there wasn't much signage. It just, in the previous signage slide, if you just head along that way, you'll end up getting to this point. And it takes you to these really nice rock overhangs right here. And just remember, under these areas are sensitive areas, so don't trample them too much. Or don't trample them at all. But inside here, it's just really, really a good spot to wander and look at plants and botanize along the way. There's lots of ferns growing on the rocks here. And this was an exciting moment during the hike. So I was coming up this way right here and spotted a deer right about right here when I was right about right here, and spooked the deer and spooked me and Mingo, and we were all just running along the way. It was a pretty exciting part of the hike. And then just the creek right here too is very scenic coming out. This whole wall here was covered in walking ferns and Micranthes forbesii, the Forbes saxifrage. So pretty good species right there. So getting into the challenges here, we have ID 5 ferns. So we have the rock polypody fern, Polypodium virginianum, Cleopeltis polypoidioides, the resurrection fern, Splenium rhizophyllum, the walking fern. So both these two were growing off of rocks. This was growing off a rock too. The walking fern, so it actually is able to reproduce off the tips of its leaves. Diclasium pycnocarpon. This is the glade fern. So it's right in the middle of that cityscape rock area. And then Adiantum pedatum, the maidenhair fern. But there was a lot of ferns out there. There's, like I said, I had identified 13, but who's to say that there aren't 20? So this is Aruncus dioicus. the goat's beard. On the way out, right past those rock outcroppings, as you're making your way, there's a Runcus dioicus. This is a really fun plant to see. Found in rich, dry woods, according to Mullenbrock. And so this is the state that it's in right now. It had just gotten done flowering, but when it is in flower, so if you catch it next year, you'll see it looks like this. This is a photo I had from years past. All right, so ID3 species in the Urticaceae family. Went with Pilea pumila, the clearweed. So this has got very nice nettly leaves. It's clearweed. When you hold it up, you can see it's a lot more different looking than Bomeria cylindrica, a false nettle. Then Urtica dioica, stinging nettle. This one, you'll definitely know if you found it because it'll sting you. It itches for a while. So, finding Joe Pye. Joe Pye has a world arrangement here. And if you find him, give him a high five. Say hey to him. Mail all your selfie photos to Chris Evans. Here is Heuchera parviflora. This is a called late alum root, and it's in the Saxifragaceae family, the saxifrage family. So this is found on moist sandstone cliffs and is common in the south 1/6 of Illinois, but absent elsewhere. So this is a really interesting one. This is a good southern Illinois one, and it's growing all over the rocks there as you're walking around. So you can just walk past it, admire it. It's everywhere. That's a really fun one. So now we've made it through the awesome geology section, and we're on section 3 now. This is the area back out of the awesome geology section to the parking lot on an old roadbed. So 5 activities to do along the way. We have ID 2NNIS, it's non-native invasive species. See the sea oats. Find pencil flower. Find Ascora multicol, that's St. Andrew's cross. And then find Antonaria plantaginifolia. So some of the signage here. Take the trail back to the parking lot. So as you make your way back out of the rock outcroppings, you'll see the sign here. Take this to the trailhead. And I'll take you down this trail here. This is a pretty easy walk back out too. It's not too treacherous. You are leaving some elevation changes, but not too bad. That's what it looks like on the way out. And it'll take you all the way back to the parking lot where you started. One thing to notice, there's a boot brush station here. Brush your feet. And we just got done updating a lot of these stations too, so we'll have brushes and everything on them. Find 2 non-native invasive species. So we have Rosa multiflora, the multiflora rose. That's one that I found. And this is different from the native one because it has a fringed stipule. So unlike Rosa carolina, it's got a fringed stipule. And then Microstegium viminium, stiltgrass, not this madder here, the stiltgrass here. So this is a grass with a silver midvein and a little bit wider leaf too. It's an annual grass. It's a pretty big problem. This was found throughout the entire area too, not just on this section 3. This is found throughout the entire wilderness area. So there's the sea oats right here. See the sea oats. This is Casmanthium latifolium. It's in the grass family. And this is just a really common attractive grass growing along the trail here as you're making your way out. Just brush your hands along it. This plant here was actually named after pencils. No, actually it wasn't, but this is Stylosanthes biflora. It's in the bean family, and it's common in dry woods in the southern quarter of the state. It's got the same color as number 2 pencil though, and pretty attractive little flower. It's tiny little plant that produces a tiny little bean flower. So you can see there's the banner, wings, and keel right there of the bean flower. You may remember this plant here from the flyer. This is St. Andrew's cross. So this is the flyer. This is the plant that was on the flyer. Ascarum multicol. It's in the St. John's wort family, but unlike things in the Hypericum genus, this is got 4 petals. So it's the Hypericum genus has 5 petals. So that's a good one. Finally, find the pussy toes. Entonaria plantaginifolia. So this would have been taken maybe earlier in the spring, this photo here. So right now it's going to be in a vegetative state. And plantaginifolia has a plantain-looking leaves, very hairy looking. It's in the aster family, surprisingly. And this is a common species that was found along the trail all along the way. All in these woods here, you can see it growing. And so that's the end of the time and the hike out to Panther Den. So you can plan your own hike as you want, and maybe this gave you some ideas of some things to look for and some plants to identify along the way.
Great, thank you so much, Nick. That's really awesome. If anybody has any questions, comments for Nick, go ahead and put them in the chat box. And then Nick, why don't you stop sharing your screen and we'll move over to Kurt's talk, which I'm super excited about, learning more about what happened to the Botrychium genus.
Hi all, thanks for coming. To kind of make this cohesive with Nick's talk, after Nick had went on his hike, we chose this group to discuss as just kind of a quick focus on getting more oriented to our own flora. And honestly, I like this idea of discussing this group because the taxonomic changes that have happened, I haven't really investigated. So I took this as an opportunity to learn for myself. I'm just gonna check to make sure y'all can hear me. Are we good?
Yep, you're coming in loud and clear, Kurt.
Great. So here is what's happened over the past 17 years or so. Back when I was an undergraduate and graduate student and I was learning this group of ferns, I learned them all as the genus Botrychium. However, recently, fern taxonomists have favored separating this genus into 4 separate genera. One of these genera, you might see Japanobotrychium, is an Asian group. It's not very rich. But these other 3 genera, Botrychium, Botrypus, and Sceptridium, can all be found in North America. For decades now, there have been consortia of scientists, and it seems kind of silly, but they form these consortia with these fun names like taxonomists studying the angiosperms, call themselves the Angiosperm Phylogeny Group. And those studying ferns and lycophytes call themselves the Pteridophyte Phylogeny Group. Back in 2016, they actually published a recommendation for a generalized classification across all of ferns at the genus level. And they recommended following these genera. So in Illinois, I'm going to collectively call these all grape ferns, but their common name is also the moonworts, depending on where you are in the world. In Illinois, there are 3 genera currently recognized from these segregates. Botrychium sensu stricto, in the Botrychium in the strict sense. That's what the SS means. There's only a few rare species in northern Illinois for our own flora, so for the sake of this talk, I'm going to largely ignore them. from now on. However, we have members of both Botrypus, where we only have one species that's common throughout eastern North America. Incidentally, there's only a few other species of Botrypus, and they are found not in the New World. One is found in Asia, and one's found in Africa. And we have Sceptridium, of which there are multiple species in eastern North America, and even more in other parts of North America. A little orientation before we go any further. There are a few specialized terms when you're trying to identify members of this family, the Ophioglossaceae. They are the sporophore and the trophophore. These are terms that I've really only seen used in this one family. And what's interesting in this family is that they really only put a single leaf up at a time. And you can see that here in this photo on the right. This is all one single leaf, but the leaf is partitioned into two sections. One is photosynthetic, which you can see here with the flat, leafy looking portion. The other portion of this one single leaf is reproductive. And there's a zoom here on the left of the sporangia that release spores as their reproduction. So they're big, thick sporangia. This is where this group of ferns gets their term eusporangiate ferns from, because of these types of sporangia. And you can see them nicely mature, starting to open, most of them still closed. They look like little Pac-Men. So these are reproductive portion of the leaf and vegetative portion of the leaf. I'm going to highlight just three species. Nick in his talk mentioned Virginianum in the genus Botrypus. I'm going to highlight Dissectum and Biternatum. Both of these two species are now recognized in the genus Sceptridium. And again, you can see the sporophore and the trophophore sections of the one single leaf. And here, the sporophore coming down, meeting the trophophore, is met with one basic stalk of this single leaf. And you can see the roots coming out below. So a very unusual habit for most ferns in only presenting a single leaf at a time. Here, our first example, Botrypus virginianus. You can see that the specific epithet here has taken a new gender because the genus is masculine instead of neuter. My Latin fans out there, that's all I'll talk about for gender with words. There's a nice BONAP distribution map right here. You can see it's found really commonly throughout Illinois, but it's also very common throughout eastern North America. Beautiful trophophore and sporophore here. Our next species to highlight, Botrychium biternatum, is recorded as rare in southern Illinois, but quite common, again, through much of the southeastern US. One common note is that this species tends to be found with another cool pteridophyte. You see also in this photo, this is Diphasiastrum, a lycopode. Very cool. And then our third species to highlight here is Botrychium dissectum or Sceptridium dissectum. Less common maybe than Virginianum, but still quite common throughout eastern North America. The leaves here, which I lifted from Illinois Wildflowers, are finely dissected, but in my experience, this species is very challenging to identify and confused often because the leaves can be either finely dissected or not at all. So this can be really challenging when identifying, but I'll try to lay out a few basic features here that might help when you're identifying these. Now, most of you are interested in plant identification. You already have Molenbrock's flora, and you probably use it if you're actively identifying plants. I ignored that for this presentation because I figured you'd all that would be your go-to. And I used the literature from the flora of North America to give a perspective here. So here's a dichotomous key. I'll try not to bore you to death here. I've highlighted a kind of some basic differences between these species that you can use to identify. Remember that Virginianum is put into this genus Botrypus, and Biternatum and Dissectum are put into the genus Sceptridium. Well, they're grouped likewise in the key here. This Botrypus virginianum has thin leaves. At the very base where the leaf meets the ground, there's a sheath. It's a thin membrane that doesn't wrap all the way around the stem. And the leaves die in the winter. Versus these two other species, Biternatum dissectum, the leaves are much thicker, they're leathery. The leaf sheaths are closed. That means where they wrap around the stem, they're wholly wrapped around. And the leaves stay present through most of the winter. To tell these two apart, well, Biternatum and Dissectum, well, Dissectum tends to be much more dissected. Biternatum, as we saw in the photos before, tend to be much fewer pinnules. And you can see that in this comparison here, 2 to 3 pinnate leaves, 2 to 4 pinnate leaves. This simply means that they're, the higher this number, the more times those leaves are dissected. But if you read the rest of this terminology, man, the shape of those tiny little leaflets, the pinnules, can be very, very variable. So sometimes hard to tell these apart. This species Dissectum tends to be attributed to be much more common in our flora. So as a sheer probability, you might expect to see this one more often. I have never tested this to know for sure how well this works, but you know how a lot of plants that are herbs that overwinter, they tend to change colors when it gets cold. Well, these do too. This one kind of turns a darker olive green. This one tends to turn a kind of bronzy brown. I'm a systematist, and I can't help but show a phylogenetic tree. This is a rather old one, but from 2003, from Hawk et al. But it is the simplest. It kind of shows the relationships here the best. Botrychium, in the strict sense, which I largely ignored in this presentation because we don't have many species here. We don't have any species in Southern Illinois. Here's Sceptridium, which is a nice, well-supported group, and Botrypus. Interestingly, Botrypus is not very well supported as a group. You can see the branches don't come from a single stem. And there have been many publications about relationships in Ophioglossaceae over the years since this, but this is still a relatively unresolved concept here of how well this group forms a natural lineage. So some key takeaways here. Segregate genera of Botrychium in the broad sense have been widely accepted. This is kind of unusual. A lot of taxonomic opinion is tumultuous, but because of the pteridophyte phylogeny group coming together to take a position and say, we all think this should be the classification that people follow, a lot of people have followed it because of that. I will note that if you look at that phylogenetic tree I just showed, Botrychium in the broad sense are a natural group. Therefore, taxonomic changes that follow natural phylogenetic trees, those classifications are not strictly necessary. So in this case, this is kind of what's a good word here? I guess optional, given the data of evolutionary relationships. being in the community of scientists that study this, I've heard from folks that have been involved in these taxonomic changes, and essentially their decision was political. I think it's a good decision because what I highlighted before was that there are actually some important phenological differences, say between Sceptridium and Botrypus. Remember, Sceptridium has this amazing feature of overwintering, whereas Botrypus does not. So there are some ecological variation here that is kind of evolutionarily important. And the political thing in my point here is that in conservation, there are a lot of decisions that are made because of the taxonomic level. So to say that something is a different genus, or to say that something is a different species, carries more weight in conservation circles than if it were, a smaller rank. So in that sense, the taxonomist essentially meant to highlight the differences among these things. So with that, I thank you for listening, and I'll turn it back over for questions.